Today we are speaking with Piet le Roux, CEO of Sakeliga, a public interest group that does public interest litigation and alternative structures to help shape a prosperous business environment in South Africa. Piet, thank you very much for making time for us today. Sakeliga has made a name for itself for helping businesses in many struggling municipalities across the country. One where there's been substantial victories this year has been in Ditsibotla in the northwest. Could you please take us through what prompted Sakeliga's intervention in the municipality?
We were approached by business people in the town, in particular Agri Northwest, an agricultural group there, and they came to us and said, look, we have a problem in Lichtenburg. We want to do something about it in Ditsibotla, but we think that we'd like to partner with Sakeliga on this because we see that you have some expertise in litigation and can help us develop a legal strategy to do so. And that was several years ago, and it's been a rough ride, but we've successfully managed to force both the province first to intervene, and then ultimately now, a month or two ago, the national government. And that is the highest level of intervention provided for in the event that a municipality collapses, as it has in Ditsibotla in the Constitution. So we have now exhausted all the explicit constitutional provisions for recovering a failed municipality. And the next year or so will be a time of monitoring. And we're still in touch with our partners locally, and we'll see. I mean, it's possible that things improve. That'll be great. But if it doesn't, we'll have to combine litigation with alternative structures from what the businesses in the town can do, because ultimately we can't wait on the state to make a town work. It has to happen by hook or by crook. And if the state doesn't do its job, then, well, we'll have to find another way to intervene.
And with local businesses in Ditsibotla, when they try to help the municipality to improve, what were some of their biggest obstacles that they faced that necessitated things like litigation?
The collapse in the administration of the municipality in Ditsibotla is extensive. At times, there was just nobody in the municipal buildings anymore. The papers were just blowing in the wind through the streets. Some of the strikes had seen employees dump paperwork and computers and everything in the streets and destroying the administrative capability. Then salaries, of course, hadn't been paid frequently or was paid late, and that wasn't good for morale. Not that much happened on the side of the employees often. I mean, there were some good people, but it's but a sorry state of affairs. On the council side, there's been at multiple times in Ditsibotla's recent history more than one person claiming to be mayor or claiming to be speaker of the council, and the province and national government at the time failed to clear that up. We've even seen President Ramaphosa visit the town himself. This was about 18 months ago, 2 years ago. He visited it shortly before the previous elections. And he's on record, on video. It's available on YouTube, where he promises that things will improve within weeks and that they're going to disband the council and have new elections. But then the state of affairs deteriorated to the point where the provincial minister of Kokta recently even said that he doesn't see any improvement, even if there's a new election, because the same people will just be voted in again. That tells us something about the structure of politics in South Africa. And well, maybe we can get into that later in the discussion. But I think ultimately the way the state is structured, the way the political mechanism is structured relative to the way the economy is structured, we need to rebalance that power, and we need to rethink how we constrain the state insofar as it can intervene in the economy. And I think that's the long-term solution. Certainly, that's been the problem in Ditsibotla, that the state is far too powerful nominally and then prevents businesses and community members from taking over the failed municipality and municipal infrastructure and so on, and also still claiming the money from the town, still claiming levies and rates and taxes, even though very little happens.
Yeah. And do you think if Sakeliga didn't attach the president and ministers to the litigation about the failing municipality, that we would have seen this national intervention? Because it happened quite soon after after it happened.
Yes, the Minister of Treasury, the Minister of Cocta, President Ramaphosa himself, the whole of cabinet, in fact, have neglected their obligations to intervene under Section 139 of the Constitution, Section 1397. That does not give them the option to intervene. It gives them the duty to intervene when a municipality collapses, as has been evident in the Tsibotla. And so they then opposed our litigation, but not on substantive grounds. And when the province even publicly started acknowledging that they have given up, we then informed the president, we informed the Minister of Cocta, we informed the Minister of Finance that we will be seeking personal cost orders against them for failing in their duty to intervene. And it was shortly after those letters to which our legal team received acknowledgement of receipt, and to which we received a reply from the state attorney, then informing us that, okay, they will now have a national intervention done. And then within, I think, about 2 weeks, they had that process through cabinet and publicly announced. So there's, on our side, no doubt that this was a very necessary step, and the final one that actually got them across the line. So it's now up to them to show that they can intervene and make good on the promises they have done. And but we, of course, will be monitoring, and the businesses in town as well.
And we see, unfortunately, it's a pattern that we're seeing across the country where there's collapsing municipalities, service delivery has taken a complete backseat, and it's killing businesses. Are there other towns that Sakeliga has or is going to be launching litigation against currently in the pipeline?
We're keeping our options open, but we're not preparing litigation against another municipality at the moment. We're focusing on some of the other matters. NHI, we just launched. We're working on some competition law stuff. We're probably going to announce litigation against the International Air Services Council on BEE requirements on international airlines coming into South Africa. So those are a larger priority now. We need to give the national government a chance to make good on its promises. If it doesn't, that will be the basis for further litigation. So not currently, although we do have a network network of chambers of commerce in about 30 municipalities across the country, who connect with one of our staff members, who share information, and we try and share learnings of successes in one place and failures in another with these chambers. And I must also say that, Sakeliga is not necessary for success in a town. We can help, but there are also good people, I think, in a town like Frankfurt, for example, where through good cooperation between some private providers of electricity or administrators of the electricity infrastructure, the agricultural groups there, the local chamber of commerce, you see actually very good things happening in some towns. And we take encouragement from that Sakeliga does not need to be involved everywhere for there to be a success. But in time, we stand ready to be involved again where there's an opportunity.
And for those businesses in those struggling towns across the country, what would your advice be to sort of challenge the ailing service delivery, to take it on? Would it be where businesses become state-proof? What are different pieces of advice before maybe they come and approach you for help?
Some good things we've seen happening was where the town or the business people found a way to negotiate with the municipality, sign memoranda of understanding, and that can be informal. It doesn't sometimes, the legal status of it even is dubious, but it works because in this vacuum of state failure, in this vacuum of state authority, sometimes a good understanding between municipal officials and the local business people can lead to good outcomes where they say, look, we're just going to get something done, and maybe the paperwork isn't that clear, but then everybody just agrees and nobody intervenes or to frustrate that process. So that's worked in some towns. In other towns, what we've seen really important is good alternative record keeping. So that means trying to keep track of disputes with the municipality, figuring out which businesses are disputing their levies, their rates and their taxes. And if you do that by following proper procedure, and if you document that at a central place, if you even start in a certain way an alternative municipal administrative record keeping system, you're in so much a better position once you need to start litigating, or once you need to start negotiating with the municipality, let's say, to start focusing on repairing this transformer rather than some other corrupt contractor. So steering the municipality is helpful if you have good record keeping, and if you have a good relationship. But if the relationship isn't there, then don't hesitate to go into litigation, and be firm. Have those disputes in place. Um, it's a multi-year process, and where the town develops the capability to maintain their attention, their ability to maintain relationships over multiple years. That's, I think, where we see success. Where you just try and do this after hours between 10 and 12 at night with volunteers, that's more difficult. So you have to build institutional capacity at a local level. I think those are some of the suggestions and things we've seen that works.
And what you touched on briefly earlier, moving on to the big focus of the organization, which has been the what you've described as the third wave of BEE. Could you please unpack what some of the biggest risks are associated with these new employment equity sectoral quotas, and the impacts that it's going to have on different sectors across the country?
Yes, the Employment Equity Act and the regulations that now have set quotas within to which companies with 50 or more employees should subscribe in the next 5 years is a very harmful development. It requires businesses to run their staffing off a government spreadsheet. And you can't do that anywhere in the world, and you can't do that in South Africa. Additionally, this spreadsheet has very morally and well, let's start with that, morally objectionable elements. For example, in about 25 of the percent of cases, white men are limited to a maximum of 4% of positions at top level or at skilled level within the company. These categories are vague. There's a vague definition of 18 sectors and a vague definition of employment levels within companies. But somehow the minister requires for these hundreds of combinations that businesses with 50 or more employees should follow them, follow these prescriptions and employ based on these spreadsheet calculations, actually. It's impossible to meet because the skills distribution in the economy does not exist. It's also impossible to meet because it goes against the grain of what some businesses are. For example, a family business, like, for example, many farmers, according to these spreadsheets by the minister, the male farmer would not be allowed to bring his son onto the management team because that would violate the quota. He would have to bring in, let's say he has only sons, he would have to bring in a female colored or black or Indian person from outside into his company. Businesses don't work like that, and especially family businesses don't. So for many reasons, we call these targets morally objectionable, we call them unethical, and we call them impossible to meet. Also, they don't only apply to local companies, they apply equally to international companies. And so this is certain to be a sticking point, not only for the US, but also, I suspect, for many other countries around the world, as their companies will start approaching the local embassies, telling them, look, we've had this labor inspector arrive telling us that we should meet the spreadsheet requirements, but what is this now? So this is actually going to be quite a controversial mechanism, policy by the government for the next 5 years. On our side, we're litigating against this with our partners, NIASA, the National Employers Association. We've been denied an urgent interdict last month. We've just last week filed an appeal to the Constitutional Court, and we're also proceeding with a parallel non-urgent interdict in the High Court. So there's actually lots of litigation over the next 5 years from our side. BUSA has now launched a challenge. We will see multiple individual companies challenging the penalties and the fines that they are accorded under these regulations. So my message at this stage to businesses across South Africa, whether you're local or international, is don't try and just comply with everything on the minister's version. Figure out, get good legal advice, figure out what is possible within your company. Don't compromise yourself by making promises that you can't keep. In particular, contact the National Employers Association, the ASA, for a second opinion, even if you have an opinion already, because the implications are existential. Unfortunately, on a good note here is it's so bad. These regulations are so bad and so unattainable that most businesses, we expect most businesses in South Africa not to be able to comply. And that means there's safety in numbers. And you also have time to consider, even though there are damaging aspects to the regulations now, there are ways to mitigate that. And that is our recommendation.
And what should be the case of if the Labour Department then intervenes? It's a two-part question. How would the Labour Department then enforce such new stringent regulations? And would you see such enforcement, as you said, lead to widespread closures of businesses who just physically cannot comply with these regulations because either they can't get the right skill sets in, or, like you said, family businesses? How do you see this playing out now, if it is the law?
The department has and is in the process of appointing multiple times the labor inspectors that they currently have. So they foresee a little army of labor inspectors to enforce this. Now, having more staff isn't the only thing that's going to be required. You're actually going to have to build the systems to administer this, the appeals, the multiple rounds of litigation that will have to gone through every time they try and levy a penalty of some sort, or make a finding against the company. If that company, as they should have proper labor law advice and a labor law strategy on how to deal with these targets, then we think it's very unlikely that the Department of Labor will be able to deal with this at scale.
About that, do you see with these new labor inspections and all of that, that if people are going to be forced to comply, you'll see many businesses closing, businesses that wouldn't just have maybe one race, but it will still lead to job losses across the board?
Yeah, look, if bad policy, very bad, terrible policy was enough reason to close a business, then there would be no businesses left in South Africa already. We have terrible, terrible economic policies and no economic growth at a GDP level. And that is because of BEE, employment equity, as it had been even before these regulations, competition law, uncertainty about property rights, etc., etc. So somehow businesses have found ways to add value, even despite all that we've seen so far. Now, thankfully, this experience that businesses have had in South Africa, I think that with that experience, they will be able to deal also with the coming Employment Equity Act regulations and attempted enforcement. There are ways to deal with this. You will see companies splitting into smaller divisions. You will see divisionalization, so to get below the 50 employee threshold. You will also see companies resisting this and just deciding, well, they're going to get plans that they can defend, employment equity plans that they will submit, and they will go the litigation route. Then there's the Sakeliga route of litigation. BUSA is litigating. So I actually don't expect this to cause massive closures of business. I expect this to be an additional cost that businesses will still find a way to deal with. Some will close, maybe especially some international businesses might leave. Actually, we also, for example, in our litigation, we have affidavits by companies wholly owned by German companies in South Africa, where they say that they are now being required by South African law to do something which they are prohibited to do under German law. And so in those circumstances, we may see companies closing or not complying. And then once that, maybe some will decide, well, they're just going to keep doing business. And if the 10% penalty comes and the 10% of turnover penalty comes and they can't afford it, then they'll close then. So I don't expect a massive closure of businesses now. I actually am quite optimistic that businesses in South Africa have experience with dealing with a harmful government and there'll be marginal, again, a marginal contraction and a recessionary effect, but I think overall we will prevail.
And does the organization see the current Department of Employment and Labor as a fit for purpose department focusing on job creation, or is it more of a department now increasingly having its focus on trying to implement transformative policies of a particular party? Is the department being used for maybe what it was intended to be used, or more now just being used as more intervention by the state?
I think the Department of Labor adds very little value today. Even before these regulations, just think what comes out of the department: minimum wage laws, incredible amount of red tape. The country experiences high levels of unemployment. You can. It's a very rigid labor market in a very poor country. So I'm afraid that the Department of Labor, even before this, I wouldn't call it a fit for purpose entity. And insofar as there needs to be such a department, or it is appropriate for the state to have such a department, if it wants it to add value, to create a flourishing economy, create a flourishing communities, and safety and employment and good labor prospects, it would have to rethink that mission completely. There's very little that positively that can be said about the Department of Labor in South Africa.
And now moving on to a big case that has caught the country's attention is the expropriation without compensation case taking place in Ekurhuleni. You've said that the upcoming court case will be a litmus test for the country and the country's economy. Can you unpack the risks of if this case goes the wrong way and the importance of this case?
Yeah, there are two important cases with regard to expropriation with compensation that we are involved with or monitoring. The first is the case by the owners of the Driefontein farm in Ekurhuleni. This property has been expropriated without compensation. The municipality has explicitly called it a test case, and the owners are now not contesting the expropriation. That has already happened, but they are contesting the no compensation decision. That is up for mediation at the end of October and then set for an 80-day trial in February next year. It's very important that the owners prevail in their claim for compensation. We'll have to closely monitor the court proceeding. We'll have to see, of course, whichever way it goes next year in the High Court, there is possibility of appeal, and it's the kind of thing that's likely to end up in the Constitutional Court. Unfortunately, this has already drawn out for 7 years. The owners have tried to keep this out of the news, settle this amicably, but it's only now it's now in the open and going to court. And after the appeals process, we're still likely to see, we're several years possibly still away from the finalization of this no compensation decision, actually overturning it. The no compensation decision has been taken. Now, just think of this. We have a 10-year legal uncertainty for the owners of Driefontein about whether they're going to get compensation for their property, let's say estimated something above 30 million rand. If whether, regardless of which direction this goes, this creates a degree of uncertainty for all similar properties in a municipal setting everywhere else in the country. There are 200 municipalities in South Africa, and all similar property are now potentially liable for expropriation without compensation for social housing in the so-called public interest. And so as the more this progresses and the longer it's delayed that the no compensation decision is overturned, the more financially the more of a financial requirement it will become for other companies to restate the value of their assets on their books, or for reappraisals of their market value to take place. So that's the reason why this case is so important, because of the implications for the asset values, not of that company, but of all similar property, whether it's held on listed entities, in pension funds, or privately held. And then on Sakeliga's side, we are bringing an expropriation without compensation case. More strictly speaking, we are bringing a constitutional challenge against the Expropriation Act of 2024, which was assented to earlier this year by President Ramaphosa. The reason we're bringing that challenge is because the 2024 Act removes many of the protections that had been in place under the 1975 Act for owners to be compensated with at expropriation. The Driefontein case happened under the old Act, and the municipality is through the course of the proceedings, they actually wanted to have the 1975 Act declared unconstitutional, and this just shows again why it's important to challenge the 2024 Act, because it removes the protections of the 1975 Act. So these are the two important legal developments. The one is the Driefontein claim for compensation, and the other is the constitutional challenge against the Expropriation Act. We're bringing one. The DA, AfriForum, and others have already brought cases on with other approaches.
And with Driefontein, do you see it as a case of where there is a genuine want for something like social housing? When you see in Ekurhuleni already, there's dozens of social housing mega projects that have been abandoned, never completed, never fulfilled on those promises. Do you think it's actually a case of wanting to go for the social housing, or create precedent for the case of expropriation in the public interest? Is it more of a political agenda in that regard?
If the city of Ekurhuleni had not become involved in the so-called social housing project and this expropriation, it's quite possible that housing would have been standing already on that development. The owners had been applying for development rights, had received initial approval. There were some appeals from the community against the development, and so by the time of the expropriation, that was still ongoing, and so now it's not their land anymore. They can't develop it. But absent the municipality's intervention, they may very well have been housing. And I think that's a generalizable statement. Absent the state's attempts at expropriation, the state's frustration, its collapse of administrative capability to grant land development rights, we would have had much better housing developments in South Africa already. It's definitely a political decision to expropriate at no compensation, and the pretext of public interest in social housing, that is just what it is. It's a pretext. 7 years after a so-called urgent expropriation for social housing in the public interest, no development has been done on that property. The city is bankrupt, and in fact, almost no municipality in South Africa has the capability to develop multi-million rand development projects the size of Driefontein or even smaller. So the shortest path to more housing in South Africa and security of tenure is through letting developers do what they do best, and for the city to get out, not try and compete with them or expropriate them without compensation.
100%. And throughout the discussion, we've touched on how government, either maladministration or overreach and intervention, the harmful impact that it has on businesses and residents in South Africa. The organization has spoken about state-proofing businesses or residents. Could you discuss against government failure? Could you give some practical examples of how businesses or residents, but mainly businesses, can become state-proof currently?
Well, there's the easiest way to state-proof yourself is at an individual level, and the amount of boreholes that have been sunk, the amount of alternative energy provision, whether it's solar or generators set up in backyards, private security, closed off neighborhoods, security in business districts funded by the business people. Those are all forms of state proofing. It's a form of securing yourself against the state's failure to provide collective infrastructure and collective security solutions. Individually, that you can get quite far, but it's hard to scale. And so that's where the second degree of state proofing comes in, if you will. It's the degree that's not that well developed in South Africa, but it's what we will see a lot of in the next few years if we are to be a successful society. And that is where businesses, it can happen also at a community level and so on, but from a business perspective, it's where businesses will start working together on collective solutions on public security, on shared infrastructure and on conducive economic and property regulations. Sakeliga does some of that in terms of what we're doing with litigation. You can call that a form of state proofing when we litigate against expropriation without compensation. It's a form of constraining the state to the extent that it can intervene in the affairs of business. We'll just see more of that over the years. So there's the individual exercise and there's the collective exercise. Part of, just think about private security. There are multiple times as many security guards in South Africa as there are police officers. Most of that happens at a for-profit level. That's all good and well, but we're also seeing some very good examples of not-for-profit security operations. I just visited one recently in Johannesburg, and these people are doing excellent work to secure the public spaces around businesses, even at a residential level, and they're doing very well. So these are some examples of state proofing. Firstly, state proofing starts with a mindset of just thinking, who's responsible for a favorable business environment? Is it me? Is it business people? Or is it the state? And if you say it's the state, I know that sounds appealing, but it's actually debilitating because it removes the locus of control. I think it's better to think of yourself as a businessman and as a business community. We should think of ourselves as responsible in the final analysis for a favorable economic order. And we may have over the years have contracted some of that out to the state or allowed the state to take responsibility for some of that. But if they're failing at that, that doesn't absolve us from the responsibility in the final instance. And I think that's state proofing for the next decade in South Africa. It's internalizing locus of control, and we'll fail at some attempts, but we'll be successful as at many as we need to. And that's frankly the only viable future I see for a favorable economic order in South Africa.
Well, thank you very much. That was Piet le Roux, CEO of Sakeliga, a group that uses public interest litigation and alternative structures to shape a prosperous business environment in South Africa. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure, Seth. Thank you.